today we have with us as a visiting scholar in practice, Mr. Pat O'Brien, who will deliver a presentation entitled Square Peg Teens in Round Hole Families and Facilities. Let's Stop the Insanity. Pat O'Brien is the founder and executive director of You Gotta Believe, the older child adoption and permanency movement, Inc. You Gotta Believe is one of the few placement agencies in the country that limits its practice to finding permanent parents who will legally or morally adopt teens, preteens, or young adults in foster care. Mr. O'Brien offers keynotes, trainings, workshops, and consulting across the country, and also produces and often hosts You Gotta Believe's weekly cable access television show and radio forum. Mr. O'Brien has his Master of Science degree in social work from Columbia University School of Social Work. I ask that you please join me in inviting him to the stage and thanking him for joining us today. Mr. Pat O'Brien.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Hey, can you hear me? It's on? You guys hear me? Yeah, okay, good. All righty. Wow, that's, they told me there was a visiting scholar coming. I was waiting for him, and then you just introduced me as the visiting scholar. Wow. Just always like to know who I'm speaking to and who's in the room when I start a presentation. So just like just by a show of hands, how many people are in the room today? Just right. Okay, very few of you. That's not good, but it's right after lunch, so that's no problem. Now, out of the folks that are here, how many of you work in child welfare in some capacity? Not the legal system, the child welfare system. Okay. How many of you work in the legal system? Okay. How many of you folks are line workers? You're not a supervisor or above. You're doing the day-to-day work as a volunteer or a line worker. Okay. How many of you are supervisors or above? Anybody in the room a parent? Okay. Any adoptive or foster parents? All right. Anybody here spend time as a youth in care? Thank you for sharing. I appreciate hearing that. And that's generally the breakdown. About 98% of us have not spent time in care as a child. But can I start out with the assumption that whatever your reason of being here, whatever your role in life is, that everybody in this room considers themselves on some level or another a child advocate? Can I make that assumption? Yeah, okay, good. I always like to start out with a little self-assessment survey to really help folks fine-tune your own commitment to the work with kids. And what I have here is something that you all have in your possession. And it asks the simple question, are you being called to serve a child? The self-assessment survey, and we're going to learn what your greatest gift is in your call to be of service to children. We're going to do these directions together to assess which activity, skill, decision, or role in life is your greatest attribute in your ability to be of service to a child. Whatever box your finger ultimately lands on will be the area where you can offer a child your greatest gift. Now, I do ask you to keep your mind open. I do ask you to suspend judgment and really enjoy this self-assessment, because you're going to learn a great deal about your individual greatest strength as it relates to serving children. Now, if you wouldn't mind, can you put your finger or a pen on any one of these shaded boxes, any one of these shaded boxes? You all on a shaded box right now? That only requires a grunt, yes or no? Are you all on a shaded box right now? Thank you. Now, you see I'm moving my finger straight left to right, straight left to right? I want you to move your finger straight left to right to the nearest white box. You all on a white box right now? Thanks. Now, you see I'm moving my finger straight up or down, straight up or down. I want you to move your finger straight up or down to the nearest shaded box. You all back on a shaded box right now? Okay. Now what I'd like you to do is move your finger one box diagonally, left or right. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you land back on a white box. You all back on a white box right now? Okay. Now, one more time, I want you to move your finger straight left or right to the nearest shaded box. Now, where your finger is right now, that is your greatest gift in your call to be of service to children. So what do some of you have? Well, maybe I should ask a different question. How many of you landed on adopt a teen? Wow, okay, good. You know what that shows? That you're all really good at following instructions. By the way, anybody not land on adopt a teen? Nobody? Everybody landed on adopt a teen? All right, good. Then I don't have to diagnose anybody in this group. Because if you happen not to have landed on adopted teen, you know we work in a field where we diagnose the heck out of kids. If you happen not to have landed on adopted teen, you would have suffered from one of three possible disorders. UDDD, which is the worst disorder, that's up-down deficit disorder. Or maybe LRDD, which is what I suffer from a lot of times, that's left-right deficit disorder. And then we got DDD, which is diagonal deficit disorder, and that is, if you got that, I want you to try a little bit extra hard to pay attention to what I'm saying today. Now, turn over the sheet if you don't mind. Obviously, we were all supposed to land on the same box, and I think everybody did. Now, when I'm in groups a lot less friendly than you guys, with even more folks, for that split second, where folks are not still sure whether this is a real exercise or an icebreaker or a magic trick, for that split second, when everybody lands on the same box, or 95% of people land on the same box, you hear a collective groan from that audience. And the groan sounds something like this. Oh. Because that's not the box they wanted to land on. They would have much preferred to land on maybe the teacher, the advocate, the mentor, the coach, the friend, the role boxes. And the bottom line is when we recruit lifetime parents for teenagers before they age out of our care, you need to be all those roles in a kid's life. A teacher, an advocate, a mentor, a coach, and a friend. Some people would have preferred to land on one of those skills development boxes, acting silly and playful, being a good listener, showing empathy, helping kids with their self-esteem issues. And the bottom line is when we recruit lifetime parents for teenagers before they age out of care, if the parents don't come with those skills, they certainly need to develop those skills after their kids move in. And our system's pretty good on the roles and the skills stuff. We're pretty good at that. What we're not particularly good at is the unconditional commitment part. Making sure that every single kid, before they leave our care, have the unwavering, unconditional commitment that only a parent can offer before they age out of our care. And when we can get that, and that'll be what I'll be advocating today, when we can get that for every single kid before they age out, we can go a long way in preventing a major societal problem, and that problem is homelessness. Now, before I articulate a little bit more about that, I do often get asked to present in a lot of places to the point where people actually consult with me about public speaking. They ask me some questions about public speaking, and I always give the same two pieces of advice. The first piece of advice is never walk into the bathroom, especially when it's that close to the studio with one of these things on. It's very, very embarrassing. And the second piece of advice is feel confident in your material. Don't feel like you need to inundate people with statistics. Know that what you want to speak from the heart, and don't feel like you got to impress people with statistics. So you can only begin to imagine how important these statistics are I'm about to share with you right now. And that is the statistics that we had found when we started our agency in, now that's going to be very, let me see if I can, oh good, this will be better. Okay, yeah. When we started our agency in New York, one of the things that motivated us to do just this work was surveys of homeless populations. For instance, when the Coalition for the Homeless surveyed men in municipal shelters in New York City, they asked the men many questions, but one of the many questions they asked them is, how many of you grew up in foster care as children? And 60% of the men in municipal shelters had reported growing up in foster care as children. Then there was a group of mental health researchers that looked at runaway and homeless youth shelters in New York City. And they asked the young people a similar question. How many of you had reported growing up in foster care? And 50% of the kids in those shelters had reported having grown up in foster care. And Covenant House, which was our largest runaway and homeless youth shelter in New York City, did a survey of their population on a particular day. And what they had found was that 70% of the kids had reported having been in foster care. 27% lived with a foster parent, another 43% lived in foster group homes. So pretty much, we started in New York City, we were going to be in New York City, and any homeless survey that we've seen in New York City had reported half the homeless population came directly out of our care, out of child welfare's care. Now, just so you know, because I might be doing these slides a little bit fast, I just want you to know it's all on an overhead PowerPoint presentation. I just don't like Bill Gates dictating the way I make a presentation, so I don't use PowerPoint during the presentation, but they will have access to all of this, so you don't have to take very diligent notes. So I wanted to see if there was any other trends nationwide among the homeless population about this report from the homeless themselves about how much time whether they spend time in foster care as children. We looked at a survey across the river from New York and New Jersey. They did a statewide survey of runaway and homeless youth shelters across the entire state. And they asked the young people a simple question: where'd you live last year, the year before you were in this shelter? 46% of the young people had reported having been in DYFS's care, and that's their child welfare system. And then the federal government did a nationwide survey of runaway and homeless youth shelters that they funded. And they asked the young people in those shelters across the country, how many of you had spent time in foster care or been previously in foster care? And 56% of them had reported having previously been in foster care. Then there was another nationwide survey of runaway and homeless youth shelters done by MSW. And they didn't care if the program had federal funding. They just wanted to ask the people the same question they asked them in New Jersey. Where'd you live last year? Where'd you live the year before you were in this shelter? 49% of the young people reported living in some form of substitute care. 38% directly out of foster care. Another 11% lived in another shelter. And when they interviewed, when the Urban Institute interviewed homeless youth under 20 years of age, 61% of them had reported having been placed in foster care, group home, or another institution before the age of 18. So there's a direct correlation between the work that we do and homelessness. In fact, the case can be made that we create child welfare, creates half the homelessness by the way we practice day in and day out. And that's not only true of a direct correlation between dischargees and homelessness, there's also a correlation between the next generation as well. When someone homeless has children. And again, homelessness research, not child welfare research, National Alliance to End Homelessness, looked at two homeless parent populations. Homeless parents who did not grow up in foster care and homeless parents who did. And there was about a 50-50 split in terms of their survey. And they looked at homeless parents who did not grow up in foster care. They want to see how many of their children wound up in foster care. And there they found a way too high percentage. Over a quarter of their kids spent time in foster care if you were a homeless parent who did not grow up in foster care. However, if you were a homeless parent who did grow up in foster care, they wanted to see if there was any difference in that population. And there they had found an astronomical statistical difference. If you were a homeless parent who grew up in foster care, 77% of your kids wound up in foster care at some point. And that's a dramatic difference. And the only other survey I've ever seen that looked at these two populations, homeless parents who did and did not grow up in foster care, was when the Institute for Children in Poverty looked at the precursor to foster care in New York City. That is having an open active case with CPS. Homeless parents who did not grow up in foster care, 29% of them had an open active case with CPS. Homeless parents who did grow up in foster care, they had found that 73% of them had an open active case with CPS. So there's a real connection between the next generation as well in terms of discharging people from foster care to nobody but themselves. Now, in general, common wisdom, when we hear the experts talk to us about homelessness, what's generally given as the reason why homeless people are homeless? What do you hear? Poverty, a big one. What was? Don't have a job? Mental illness? Drugs, addiction. And that's pretty much the common wisdom, absolutely. Poverty, unemployment, addiction, mental illness, that's pretty much what's given as the causal reasons for homelessness. And the only folks that really know that this doesn't totally ring true are us, child welfare professionals. And what I mean by that is, how many folks know poverty-stricken people that nonetheless live in a home and have a family, just by show of hands? Yeah, lots of us. Anybody know any unemployed people who live in homes and have a family? Yeah. How about this? Anybody know any addicted people who live in homes and have families? All right. I won't even ask you this next question. I'll just ask you to think back to your own childhoods. When we were kids, we knew there were grown-ups being taken care of by other grown-ups. And to our eye, we might not have known why. And it wasn't until we grew up that we understood there might have been some sort of mental illness or mental disability involved. But we know mentally ill people who live in homes that have families. Even though these are obviously variables among the homeless population, it really doesn't explain homelessness. What explains homelessness is the lack of any functional human relationships on the day that you're homeless. Now, throw your poverty, addiction, mental illness, and all of that creates a big problem. And perhaps half of it we can't do much about. But the other half, we create. We actually conspire to create half, inadvertent though it may be, we conspire to create half the homelessness in our culture and all the things that homelessness and being alone in the world lead to. And I'm going to submit for your consideration right now is that the major culprit that creates half the homelessness in our culture is child welfare permanency planning. A child welfare permanency planning goal. Now, if you think about our goals in general, our goals are pretty good. When a child comes into foster care, what is the first goal we're going to set for that child? Reunification. And that's a really good goal. Whatever you think about it on an individual case, that's not what I'm talking about now. I'm talking about as an overall strategy, an overall goal. Reunification is a good goal because that child, if it's achieved, that child leaves our foster care to a parent. So that's a good goal. Now, if we can't achieve reunification on that specific case, what's the next permanency planning goal we're going to be looking at for that child once we know they're not going home to the home that we just took them away from? We're going to look at relatives. We're going to look at kin. We're going to look at, I even like to open it up to kin, both blood-related and fictive. And fictive kin, an example of that would be like, half the godparents in this world are not actually biologically related to their godchildren, but they're still very connected to them. And there's a lot of folks out in the community who are connected to kids, and the kids consider them very much kin or relative. And that's a really excellent other place to look. And when that child gets discharged from our system to that parent, maybe under a guardianship arrangement or some other thing, the kid leaves our system yet again to a parent, a kin parent, relative parent, fictive or otherwise. So that goal is pretty good as well. Now, if for whatever reason, and hopefully by the end of this discussion, this presentation, you'll be convinced there is no reason. But for whatever reason, if we can't find somebody who already knows and is connected to the kid, and they're not going to go to kin and not going to go back to the folks that we had taken the child away from, then what goal is the system assigned to this young person? Adoption. And whatever anybody may feel about adoption on a case-by-case basis, adoption is a really important goal because when it's achieved, that child leaves our foster care system yet again to a parent. Reunification, kinship, adoption, all really good goals because the child leaves to another human being that we describe as a parent. Now, the problem gets all crazy and all cockamamie and all ridiculous when kids get old. And you know what I mean by old, practically grandparent age, 16, 17, 18, We're not really going to be returning them home to anybody. But we're not really going to free them for adoption or even look for adoption for them. And then what we do is we assign some other goal. And I speak in a lot of different places. So what do you call that goal here? You got a word for it? Okay, you said APLA, you said emancipation. What else? What other words you have? By the way, this long-term what? Okay, and this thing you said, APLA, do you know what that means? Yeah, okay. Now, this is a great example of professionals, when they become more uncomfortable with something, they create bigger words for it. George Carlin used to highlight that in the skits that he had done. For instance, what we had ascribed to soldiers when they came home from war. When they came home from a popular war, they were suffering from a condition called shell shock, and everybody sort of understood what that was. Then when they came home from a less popular war, the Korean War, they started suffering from a condition called battle fatigue. Not quite shocked, but a little tired, but in a couple extra words, or an extra word. And then when they came home from a totally, completely unpopular war, they started suffering from a condition called post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the mom that got her son back knew there was something wrong, said post-traumatic stress disorder, and they look at you like, what? Say shell shock. Oh, yeah, I know what that is. And we used to call this goal what it actually still is today. We used to call the goal what it is. We're emancipating the child. That's what we're doing. Setting them loose upon the land to wander, that's what we're doing. But saying what we do became very, very out of favor. So we started changing what we said we're doing. Even though we're doing the same thing, we say it's different. Now, that's where a lot of states used to call this goal, not emancipation, but independent living. Have you ever heard that one as a permanency planning goal? Independent living. We have convinced a whole generation of youth in foster care that there is this oasis called independence, and they're going to move there. And because they assume we know what we're talking about, and when we give them a choice between anything or independence, guess what? They're choosing. Anybody here have any kids at home? Yeah, I'll tell you, do a little survey. Go home tonight and give them a choice between you and independent living and see what they choose, all right? And I don't blame the kids for choosing, but they were choosing something that didn't exist. And of course, we made fun of it for a lot of years by saying, it's good to have skills development for sure, but making that a permanency planning goal, it ain't any different than emancipating a kid. So what they did was they created a new word for it. Now, the new word, you already said, another planned permanent living arrangement. It's nothing to do with another plan, it's nothing to do with permanency, it's nothing to do with a living arrangement, but that's what we're calling it because it makes us feel better, but it doesn't say anything. Now, I used to make fun of them for this. But New York's goal was independent living, and then they changed the name of their goal. And here's what New York now calls their goal. Another planned permanent living arrangement that includes a significant connection to an adult willing to be a resource for the child. That's what they call the goal. He came up with that about 2003, 2004. And I only made fun of it because I said, why can't we say what actually kids need? Kids need parents before they're discharged from care. And we have to recruit lifetime parents before they age out. Why do we got to say, because if it connects, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? New York turned out to be good prognosticators. Because what they were implying when they threw in this extra bunch of words and syllables and blah, blah, is that at least it should be another person. It should be a human being. Well, when the child welfare establishment got wind of that, they made sure they corrected this goal. Because another planned permanent living arrangement was too ambiguous for them. So they wanted clarity. And in 2006, they got the President of the United States to change the goal. And you know what actually the goal is actually called? Nobody knows this, but it's in the law. And here's what the goal is. Some other planned permanent living arrangement, which may include a residential educational program. The establishment made sure that kids living in congregate care were not out of compliance with the law. So they changed the law. So this is the government's proof. No matter what we say to you, there's no bite in the law. This is the government's proof to say, as long as we got them covered until their last day in foster care, we're okay. We're not looking out to after they age out of foster care. We're just saying up until last year. And you could have tutors walk into a group home, and now you got a residential educational program, So they were very, very slick. And if you want to know what the acronym really is, here it is. SOPLA, WMI, AREP. That's the acronym, okay? Now, some other planned permanent living arrangement, which may include a residential educational program. Now, the thought of discharging an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old to nobody but his or herself, that's absurd. In this day and age, it's completely and totally absurd. Now, my question to you is, why is this absurd? And if you guys haven't figured it out already, or we probably told you already, I come from a place called Brooklyn, New York, all right? Now, you know what we like to do in Brooklyn? Sometimes we like to answer questions with a question. So why is it absurd to discharge 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds to nobody but themselves, and the law perfectly allows us to do it? Well, let me ask you a question. Where do you think most 22-year-old college graduates come from fairly well-off, 1- to 2-parent families, go after they graduate college with a 4-year bachelor's degree? Go home. Absolutely. going home in droves, can't possibly afford to live on their own. And they got everything going for them, and they're already 22. We're discharging kids at 18, maybe 19, 20, 21 if they cooperate. Now, I'm going to play Jeopardy now. I'm going to give you the answer. And you tell me what the question is. And here's the answer. The average age is 26. What's the question? What is the average age that children leave home in the United States of America? The average age. Now, the interesting thing about this particular survey, it was a 50-state survey called the United States Census. Census taken in the year 2000. The year 2000 was the census taken after the most thriving economic decade in United States history. One thing that nobody noticed during those thriving times, there was no thriving for young people. The rich kept getting richer, but the young people kept staying home longer. I have no idea what the 2010 census is going to be reporting here, but I bet you it's not going down. And this was steady for 3 decades, the age going up. And I don't know about anybody in this room, but you ought to think about it. But personally, me, I didn't get discharged independent living until I was about 43 years old. And there was really no practical time before that I could have been discharged. I grew up in a working class neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, if you got your high school diploma, which I did by the skin of my teeth, that entitled you to just about everything. No longer true today, but back then it was true. And after you got your high school diploma in my neighborhood, you took the police test, the fire test, sanitation test, court officer test, correction officer test, post office test, transit authority test. You took all the tests. And whichever municipality called you first, that would be your career for the next 20 to 30 years, if not longer. And you hit the jackpot if police, corrections, or fire call you, because that was only 20 years. Now, they don't call you immediately after you turn 18 and take the test. So my mother knew I wasn't doing much until I was waiting for a municipality to call me. So she expected that I would be enrolling in college. Now, I have no idea why she had that expectation. She knew better than anybody that I barely got out of high school. Why would I ever go to college? But she knew about this thing that says 4-year colleges had to accept you sight unseen based on the fact that you had a high school diploma. So that's what she told me I was doing. And I really didn't have anything to argue about because I wasn't doing anything else. So I enrolled in college with a plan. And my plan was this. I would take a semester worth of classes, fail all the classes, and surely by then, police, fire, sanitation, somebody would call. And only because I grew up in a home with a lot of Catholic guilt, what I decided to do was attempt to pass the classes so that when I failed them, I wouldn't feel guilty about dropping out. So that was my plan, all right? So for the first time in my academic career, I actually made a connection between doing the work and actually doing well enough to pass. So I passed. Got through the first year, second year, third year, halfway through my senior year in college. I'm waiting for these folks to figure out I don't belong here. And I'm 22 years old, got a bachelor's degree. And by the way, I was not one of those 22-year-olds that returned home after college. Anybody want to venture a guess as to why? Never left. That's good. Yes. That's the whole point. In my neighborhood, the thought of paying for room and board when you can get it for free just did not compute. Took the train to college every day, took the train home every night for 4 years. Now, I went to a criminal justice college, but I knew I didn't want to be a police officer. I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. But I had a sense that I wanted to go into human services, and my counselors knew that. And they said, well, look, that's a noble profession, and that's fine, but why don't you consider getting a professional degree because they treat you a lot better as a professional than as just a bachelor's level person. And I said, there's no way in hell I'm going off any more schooling. I've been in school for my whole life. I'm 22 years old. I can't do anything, and I need to get some job experience. And then they sat down like good counselors do and assessed what was my major reservation. And I just told them, I just need to move on. I need to work. I need to be able to have some skill. I don't know how to do anything. In fact, the reason why I went to college was because I couldn't fix a car or a washing machine, so I went to college. And so then they told me about this degree where they make you work for 2 years to get the degree. And then after you graduate, you have 2 years of job experience in the field that you want to work in. And that's how they sold social work school to me. And I went to Columbia University. For those that might not know, that's in New York City. Took the train there every day, took the train home every night for 2 years. 24 years old. Have a master's degree, a bachelor's degree. My first job out of social work school, full-time job, paid me $13,000 a year. All right? Now, I know there's some young folks in the room that are probably thinking a million years ago $13,000 was good money. But when I was making $13,000 a year, my friends on police, fire, sanitation, they were making $26,000, $27,000. They were making twice what I was making. I couldn't be discharged independent living with 2 degrees and a full-time job. So that's when I went to Plan B, and Plan B was I met this lucrative $9,000 a year elementary Catholic school teacher. And we pooled our vast resources together, and we got ourselves a little car, and even littler apartment, and this gigantic thing called a marriage license. So yes, at 25, I got married, but let me tell you, there was no getting married in my generation if your wife didn't work. And that was true for the 13 years we stayed married, and that was a bone of contention a lot during that marriage, because there was never a time where the two of us had to work. The two of us had to work the whole time. So fast forward, 13 years later, we had a little apartment, then we got a big apartment, then we bought a little house with a little mortgage, then we bought a big house with a big mortgage, have a child now. And, we decided to separate. And I definitely don't want my daughter to move. I don't necessarily want her mother to move, but when you do this separation thing, the lawyers tell you somebody's got to move or else it's not a separation. So I was the one that had to move, but I couldn't afford to pay rent anyway because we're still paying this heavy mortgage. So guess what? I wound up moving back with my parents, thinking maybe a couple of weeks, couple of months at the most. Well, 4.5 years later, after I got my finances in order, and it took a long time for that to happen, I wound up buying my own 2-bedroom co-op, lived there all by myself, whoop-de-doo, I'm independent, I was 43 at the time. Now, I don't know what your independent living stories are, but along the way, it involves other people. It involves your people. It involves someone who considers themselves your relative, your parent. And that's what every human being needs before we discharge them from our system. Now, one last word on homelessness, and then we will, then I want to talk to you about the subject of the day: square peg teens in round hole families and facilities. Harvard University Press. When Harvard University takes on a subject, you know they want it to be the definitive work on the subject, and they decided to take on the subject of homelessness. So I don't think anybody would be surprised. In the book that they published about homelessness, they entitled that book The Homeless. All right? Now, in the book The Homeless, it makes absolutely no mention at all about the fact that we, child welfare, juvenile justice, create half the homelessness in this world by the way we practice day in and day out, letting kids loose upon the land to wander and just be discharged to emancipation. They don't notice that at all. In fact, this book is not worth quoting at all, except for a comment that they made about what prevents homelessness. And here's what they had to say about what prevents homelessness. They said this: when unmarried adults get into economic trouble, parents are usually the first line of defense against homelessness. They cite some stats that back that up, and then they end with, the contrast leaves little doubt that the main reason unmarried adults live with their parents is economic. It also shows how important parents are in keeping younger adults off the street, especially today when the income differential between the young and the elders is widening. Strong correlation between homelessness prevention and kids having parents, and that's what I'm here today to advocate for our square peg teens. Because square peg teens are simply kids who are in foster care today, and we don't know the answer to this question. Where's Johnny going to live when he ages out of foster care? It's a square peg teen. His greatest need in life is to have a parent who's going to claim him as their own for the remainder of their life after Johnny ages out of care. Now, where is that Johnny living right now? If he's not in a permanent home, that's going to answer the question, well, Johnny's going to live right here with his family after he ages out of care. That Johnny means he's living in a round hole family or facility. Now, these aren't bad places. These aren't bad people. These aren't bad programs. They're just temporary. And the kid's greatest need is permanent. And we got him in temporary. Now, just curious, by show of hands, how many of you personally know a kid that's a square peg teen and needs a permanent home by the definition that at least I'm outlining today? How many of you know that kid? Okay, good. I want you to be thinking about that kid throughout this whole presentation today, or those kids. All right, examples of square peg teens. Well, not example. Oh, yeah, actually, I want you to meet square peg teens. Okay, I just want you to hear what they have to say. And now this is supposed to go nice and smooth. This thing here is supposed to just let me hit a button and I could play the DVR. And if you haven't figured out now, it's not doing what you said it would do. And I just want to be able to do that. It's up there. Okay, how do I hit play if I can't see it? Okay, good. It's still not there. I can't touch the screen, but I do want to hit track 1. So do I estimate? Maybe I get lucky. Oh, there it is. I got it. Okay, now DVR, DVD. Okay, there we are. And DVD. And hit play. Okay, maybe that'll do it. Okay, volume loud. Addicted to moving.
I never, ever stayed at one school more than a year. And I would say approximately 2 schools per grade. So, and there's 12 grades, so that's like 24 schools.
I never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years, so I was always constantly the new kid on the block. Just always having to get used to everybody getting used to me. That was always the biggest thing. Whatever foster home I lived at or whatever family thing I was living at, I had to go to their church and listen to what they believed.
We went to a church, Friendship Baptist Church, and I joined, but then of course we moved. So I had to join another church, you know. Then I moved from there, and I have to join another church.
I've lived in homes where my parents were white, my parents were black, my parents were Hispanic, Catholic, Baptist, Jehovah's Witness, Muslim. I just feel that I can get along with a lot of different kinds of people, so that's a good thing. But then I also feel that now that I've moved so many places, I don't really feel like I'll never want to stay in one place long. It's like kind of I'm addicted to moving. And I don't know, I think that's kind of bad because you can't love one thing or stay one place long enough to love that thing because you have this inside like addiction that makes you want to just get up and go.
I had a problem that I still kind of have now. Even though I have an apartment, it's like I won't take my bags out, my stuff out my bags because I'm so used to just being told to get out, leave, do this, do that. So I lived out of bags, even when I didn't have to. When people would allow me in their house and be like, here, put it there and there. I just never felt comfortable enough to actually just settle down because I knew it wasn't forever. I've never actually just been somewhere I could say this is home and I've been here for this many years.
I always kept my quick bag, I used to call it, in the closet. It was basically 2 pairs of underwear, 2 shirts, 2 pants, and a pair of shoes that I could just wear. And I was always ready to move. I mean, I've known that was a constant. Even living with my aunt and uncle for 4 years, I always had my quick bag in the closet because it's like I always know sooner or later someone might just get mad and say, you know what, we want you out because, like they said, I'm not their kid. They can't kick me out. They do have the authority just with one phone call if they're mad enough. So I always understood that. And I really never that's another reason why I didn't make friends because it's like, why do it? They might kick me out tomorrow.
I didn't want to make a lot of friends in foster care because if you do, you move so many times. I had one best friend before, and when I moved, I just cried and cried and cried. So I tried not to make really, really good friends because they're just gonna leave.
All right. Do you guys control this going back on? Good. All right. Sure. All right. Though, they're what I call square peg teens. All of those young people were living in the foster care system, waiting to age out. We had them in our grasp, and we weren't doing anything to change their current status while they were in our grasp. Each and every one of them lived in a round hole family or facility when what they needed more than anything else was a lifetime parent recruited for them. So that's why I use the metaphor of round hole and square peg, because we blame them for moving from place to place. We blame them for everything when we don't look at our system, and our system, what it does is it takes a square peg, try to shove it into a round hole, and it just doesn't work that much. Now, these round holes, are they horrible places or bad places? No, they are not. They are what we know. For instance, we already talk about one of them. They might be residential treatment centers or schools. And if they got a school there, done deal. The kids stay in there until they age out. But nobody is often not focused on the kid's greatest need then. Even though they might be getting all sorts of treatment, but the kid's greatest need is to have some hope for his future, and we're doing nothing about that. Other types of round hole families and facilities, traditionally prepared foster parents. Good people who come forward and are told the children are staying temporary. And what do we do with teenagers except plop permanent kids into temporary homes, and then we're confused why they don't make a commitment. But they weren't recruited to make a commitment. They were recruited to help children return home, as they should be recruited. But that's not the type of family teenagers need. They're square peg, and these families are round hole. We got lots of kids living in group homes. Most of the places are very nice. They're in a community. Kids can function in the community. They're living in a group home. And a lot of the group home staff genuinely believe this is the best place for a kid. And I can't blame them for that because they hear the kids' stories. They have story after story about it. But the bottom line is, like they captured so well in the documentary Aging Out. I don't know if anybody had seen that documentary. It came out in about 2005. They taped it in about 2004. And they showed one of those really cool group homes where it was very family-like environment, and when the kid hit his 18th birthday, all the staff and all the other residents came down and blew out the candles on the cake, and they sang happy birthday, and you felt all sort of warm and cuddly. And what they managed to capture in that documentary is that was the morning when the kid woke up. But what they managed to capture in that documentary is the evening taking the kid to a shelter. And it was very, very poignant because that was a good place, but it was a round hole, and that didn't meet the kid's square peg need. And they did nothing for that kid to get him a lifetime permanent parent. Epidemic across the United States of America, and I guess you might even have this here, therapeutic treatment foster homes. Do you have that? Now, that's one of the most ironic things that we professionals had created. For a kid whose greatest need is to have hope for their future and to know where they're going to be a part of when they age out, to plop them yet again into somebody else's house, somebody else's, they look like a family, they talk like a family, they walk like a family, but it's meant to be temporary. When we do those placements, we're actually actively planning for the kid's next disruption. And also hospitals, juvenile justice centers, drug treatment settings. So that's where most of your kids, your square peg teens who don't have a family, are living at the moment. Bad places, no. Exactly what they don't need because it's temporary, yes. So what we want to do is we want to think about what we need to do before every kid leaves our care. And that is, without a doubt in my mind, we got to recruit a parent. Now, and what I like to do is I like to give you a working definition of what a parent is. It's at least one adult who makes a unilateral decision to unconditionally commit to a child for a lifetime. Now, that's pretty much what everybody, the 98%ers who didn't grow up in foster care, had from somebody. Maybe not their birth parents, but from somebody. And even 3/4 of the kids who touch our foster care system, they get discharged to a relative, to their parent, for adoption. So we're remaining 25% of the 2% is the kids that we're thinking about today, and they're going to be genuinely discharged without having the entitlement that they should have had when they came into care. They came into care for one reason or another, and they're leaving care alone in the world unless we do something about it, unless we run some interference. Now, people think being a parent to a teenager is such a hard job. But if we can equate it with being a parent is a hard job, and how many people here again are parents? How many people here have parents? Okay, very similar. Hereditary. It's not easy to be a parent. And I'm talking about just simple giving birth to a baby parent. Not easy. If you think about it, half the parents, even more now. Half the birth parents in the world, do you realize, can't stand one of the birth parents of their own birth child? Do you realize that? Because we don't, half the marriages get divorced, even closer to 65% in some urban areas. They don't get married to begin with, so they separate for other reasons. And one of the main reasons why people separate is because they can't stand each other anymore. So half the people in our culture are raising a birth child where they can't stand the other birth parent. And what do we ask those parents to do? We ask those parents to raise a child that looks more like the person they can't stand more than themselves in the world. You think that's easy? That's not easy. But that's what parents do, because parents, first and foremost, decide by themselves there will be a parent to that child for a lifetime. Every single parent that does that. Now, some of us come from the other end of parenting. Like me, I come from, my parents are married 56 years. 56 years, they're together. Bailed me out a few times during those 56 years. And of course they had me, and they're proud of me. I created You Gotta Believe, and I speak around the country, and to this day they're still wondering, how could you go to any place and speak for 2, 3, 4 hours? I mean, what do you got to say, But they're proud, even though they don't understand, they're proud. And my parents own a music store. They've been on the same corner in Brooklyn for the last 38 years. So what does my little baby sister go out and do? She goes out and becomes a music teacher at the local public school. The music teacher. So the point I'm making is she even managed to one-up me on the parental proudometer, okay? So my parents are very, very, very proud of their kids. But my sister and I, we have an older brother. He's 55. His day-to-day needs are still being taken care of by my parents. And when they gave birth to him when they were 20 years old, they probably weren't thinking that they'll be taking care of his day-to-day needs 55 years later. And that's resulting of mental illness and not being able to take care of himself. And they could have chose other ways of parenting him, but this is the way that they chose. And they did not know. The only thing they knew when that child was born is that was their child unconditionally for life. So when you bring home an 18, a 16, or 17-year-old, and we know lots about them, that's not nearly the leap that we make every day when we become parents. And in the second half of this presentation, I'll really bring home how simple it is to actually find those folks for our teenagers once we're on board with having to look. Now, we got lots of kids. When we started You Gotta Believe in 1995, we had to come up with bylaws. And in our bylaws, we had to come up with a purpose of the organization. And here's what we had said You Gotta Believe was going to be. The only purpose of this corporation, and still is today, the only purpose, is to work toward the identification for every older foster child who needs one of at least one parent who will unconditionally commit to and claim the older foster child as his or her or their own by providing a permanent loving home, family, and relationship to that child before the child ages out of the foster care system. That's the only thing we do, is recruit lifetime parents for teenagers. And we describe what we do without actually using the word, what we do. Anybody want to venture a guess to the word that seems to be omitted, even though that's what we do? I didn't use the word adoption. Because back even in 1995, and I don't regret it today in 2011, I didn't want to use the word adoption because the word adoption got co-opted by the lawyers. And I had learned that as an adoption professional before I started the agency. When I ran an adoption agency, the only kids you could place for adoption were freed kids under 18 who said they wanted to be adopted. Well, gosh, for every kid freed, willing, and under 18, there was 3 or 4 other kids that we were just going to discharge, let loose upon the land and want. It did nothing for them because, 1, nobody freed them. 2, they might have told some social worker they didn't want to be adopted. Or 3, they already turned 18. Those kids desperately needed this service. And we created an organization that we defined as a homelessness prevention program to provide this service, recruiting those lifetime parents for those teenagers. So when we outreach to the public, we actually use the word adoption. Adopt a teen. You're going to legally do it if the kid is freed, willing, and under 18. But let's not punish the kid for the system's failure of not freeing them. Let's not punish the kid for the system's failure also to give them opinion about adoption, let's say that a kid could move into a permanent home. We can still recruit lifetime families for them, and it'll be the kid's circumstance that dictate whether it's going to be a moral or legal adoption. But there's no question in the grown-up's mind, this is my kid for life, and for as long as they want a family and need a family, I'm going to be there for them. And almost every kid winds up appreciating that after their adolescence is over. When they become aged out of the system, 22, 23, the families haven't abandoned them yet. And actually, a lot of our kids wind up being legally adopted as grown-ups because what didn't make sense to them when they were 16 or 17 made perfect sense for them when somebody proved that they were worthy of being adopted by the ones who stayed by them, even after their years in foster care are over, and that they actually honored their commitment. So one way or another, for every single kid that is in our system, we got to recruit a lifetime parent for them. And I just wanted to share with you the types of families that we recruit. Types of square peg families needed for youth in foster care before they age out to no one. Obviously, for us, the first category are adoptive families. But that's only for the kids who are legally freed, willing, and or still a kid under 18. And then the second category, because New York changed their goal, we used to call it independent living permanency families. Now we call them OPLA permanency families. But what we do is these are parents who are going to morally adopt the youth because either the youth is not freed, the youth is said they don't want to be legally adopted, but they weren't resisting moving into a family that was going to keep them. And then the kid or youth who's not a youth anymore, it's technically not a child anymore, someone who's 18 and over. So our whole practice was based on either getting them one or the other, not punishing the kid for a circumstance or an opinion. We were going to recruit lifetime parents for them anyway, using whatever current system exists out there. And in that category, we broke it down. See, I don't have a problem with therapeutic families. I don't have a problem with therapeutic care at all. I just had a problem with therapeutic being a temporary solution to a kid who's aging out of care and not knowing where they're going to go. And one of the great things about having the opportunity to do model projects through federal grants is we got funded for a 4-year grant from 2004 to 2008 to place kids living in residential treatment centers into permanent families. And the goal was to do 100 kids over the course of that 4 years. And we placed over 100 kids. The average age was 16. And in the beginning of the project, we had a hard time because we would recruit a lifetime parent using the techniques I'm going to share with you. And then we're ready to make a placement. And then the agencies say, no, you can't place a child in that family. Why not? It's a permanent home. They answer the question, where's Johnny going to live when he ages out? Oh, no, but they're not therapeutic. I go, the step-down process is you go from residence to therapeutic. And initially, we resisted that. And then we said, well, you know what? There's nothing that needs to prevent these permanent homes from being therapeutic as well. Then the young person gets the best of both worlds. A lifetime family, that's therapeutic. That's the best common sense way to do those type of placements, especially for kids who are stepping down from congregate care facilities. And that's where we create the concept of therapeutic permanency, which makes a hell of a lot of sense. Now think about what we do now. We got lots of teenagers living in people's houses that didn't sign up for permanent, but are therapeutic. The only way I think I could highlight this point to you is by sharing with you another personal story. And that's about life crisis. A lot of times, when we go through life crisis, we don't always know why we need to go through that crisis as we're going through the crisis. Sometimes we don't figure it out until months, maybe even years later. And that really a crisis that I had gone through was when I got separated, thinking we'd be getting back together. And I was a fairly passive person, so I got presented with papers once, then said, why don't you just sign the papers just in case we move forward? The papers would already be signed. And I'm saying, all right, I signed the papers. Not thinking that you can get divorced without actually showing up to court. And then one day, my divorce papers came in the mail. And I was sort of stunned. I mean, I did sign the papers, but I thought you still had to show up, and I didn't. And I was sort of in a bit of a crisis because I didn't get married to get divorced. I knew we were having trouble. I thought we would be working it out, and here I am, legally divorced. I went into a bit of a personal crisis over that. And it wasn't until about maybe a year and a half later where all of this started to make sense to me, because a year and a half later is when I met Mary. And clearly, I wouldn't have met Mary if I was still married, and I don't think it would have worked if I didn't get my divorce settled. So now I'm dating Mary for about 11 months, and I'm thinking about, popping the big question. I'm thinking about, and for me, I've always been good as a social worker, helping other people make decisions, helping them along. But in terms of myself making decisions, I often want to consult somebody before I do anything drastic, like ask somebody to marry me. So I talked to my sister about it. I went to her house one day. It was around Christmas time, thinking she'd be all excited about this because she liked Mary. And my sister's cooking, and she's getting ready for Christmas, and I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, I'm thinking about asking Mary to marry me. And my sister, who started the conversation with a nice shade of pink, like I am right now, turned totally white, like white. And she said nothing, didn't say a word. And I looked at her and I go, well, what's the matter? And she goes, you mean Mommy didn't tell you? I go, tell me what? No, I'm not supposed to tell you. Mom's supposed to tell you. And I go, okay, well, obviously Mom didn't say anything, so why don't you tell me? Then she starts telling me, and she goes, no, I can't. You got to ask Mom. And I go, I wouldn't even know what question to ask. I don't know what you're talking about. What's going on? She said, all right. See, Mom hired Mary to be your therapeutic girlfriend. And I go, what? Exactly what I said. What's a therapeutic girlfriend? And she goes, well, you made such a mess out of your first marriage, you wanted to hire somebody to teach you how to be a real man. And I go, wow, that was brutal. And I said to my sister, okay, look, it's not the best way to get hooked up with somebody, obviously. But I know this thing between me and Mary is real, and I'm still going to pop the question. And my sister said with the utmost of certainty, well, she's not going to marry you. And I go, well, how do you know she's not going to marry me? She says, well, the therapeutic girlfriend program only lasts about 12 to 18 months, and then she moves on to the next therapeutic boyfriend. That's the way the program works. Now, I obviously made that whole story up, okay? But think about what we do in the name of child welfare when we place kids where their greatest need is a permanent home, and we plop them into a home of a nice family that got specialized training just to send them on their way. How do you explain that to a kid who's turning 18, who's approaching 18 and going to age out to nothingness? How do you explain that? But we professionals can come up with all sorts of wacko things that we come up with. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to be facing discharge from foster care. And a lot of kids have a defense against it. I don't care. I'm just going to leave. I'm looking forward to it. And then they go out and there's nothing there. But the fear is immobilizing. It's got to be. And I think that's why a lot of things don't work out in school and all. And I can't even begin to imagine what that's like, except on a little level. And that's when I was between the ages of 12 and 15. If you knew me between the ages of 12 and 15, you would say I was depressed, or you'd say I was very angry. And there's nothing that anybody could do to make me a happy camper, a happy person, no matter what. Christmas time, didn't care. Birthdays, didn't care. Nothing. I was miserable all the time. And it was because when I was 12, this reality came into my life, my awareness, and it lasted until I was 15 when the threat was over. And what it was is between 12 and 15, I knew I would be dead by 19, so why bother getting excited or happy about anything? I was totally and completely immobilized by fear. And it looked like depression, and it looked like anger, and it looked like a lot of things, but I was just mobilized by fear. And why get excited if you knew you were going to be dead by 19? And when I was 12 is when I became aware that there were kids leaving the neighborhood involuntarily. They were being drafted and not coming back. And 15 is when the President of the United States got on the television and said the draft was over. When the draft was over, I could see a future now. When the draft was over, I got my life back. And we see that in our day-to-day practice when we find 18, 19, 20-year-olds lifetime parents. You could see the change. They don't automatically graduate college, but you can see the change and the easing up because they have some hope that they won't be abandoned by a system or a person, which is, they're on the track right now of that. So not just therapeutic families, but we have other categories. Maternity permanency, we have come to call it. Young moms who get pregnant while they're in foster care. I've never met one who was returning home. Now, there have been some, of course, but in my day-to-day practice, haven't met one. They've been in foster care for a while, they get pregnant, and what we do is we mother-baby them out of permanency. We got this mother-baby program over here and mother-baby program over there, and there are loads of mother-baby programs, but no program that's getting the mother what she so desperately needs, and that is a mother to model what parenting is all about. So that's another category that we work very, very hard on. And we come to call this last category adult custodial care permanency families. That's another goal in New York called adult custodial care, which means the young person might need to reside in an institution for developmental needs or mental health needs. And that's generally been the reason why we stopped recruiting lifetime parents for them. And the bottom line is whether the child returns home ever or not, they are still better off on the inside having someone who considers themselves that child's parent on the outside. Medication will be better, holidays will be better, just generally getting along in life will be better when everybody knows there's somebody who cares, has the care of a parent on the outside. So even the kids who can't come home, we recruit lifetime parents for as well. And when we recruit that parent for that kid, we create a family. I just want to throw a little quote out there about the whole therapeutic thing. And this is my friend Kevin Campbell. I love this quote. It says, "The absence of an unconditionally committed parent in the life of a child cannot be treated by medication or therapy." However, when you find that unconditionally committed permanent parent, you'll find that maybe medication is less of a need, but even if it's there, or therapy makes a lot more sense because now you're working on real life issues and not the ghost of the kid's fear of where they're going to be when they get out of care. When we find a parent for that kid, we create a family. I wanted to create this working definition, just share with you our working definition of what a family is. And a family is often a place. Occasionally, kids are on the inside, parents are on the outside. So often a place. But it's always a safety net with at least one parent. And I always say at least one parent because in our practice, 70% of our families who adopt teenagers happen to be single parents. That provides a youth and or young adult with the opportunity, now get this, with the opportunity to not succeed, or perhaps even fail, until he or she can succeed. That's what every one of us had who didn't grow up in foster care. That's what 3/4 of us got, even when our lives touch foster care. And that's what we should be doing for every single kid before they age out of our care. All right, now, because we only have limited time, and I wanna have question and answer toward the end. If anybody needs to go to a bathroom or something, go ahead. But I'm not gonna stop the program. I won't be insulted if you walk out and come back and all of that. So the real question now is, like, even if you agree with everything that I just said today, let's be realistic. How the heck are you going to get a kid a family? 18, 19, 16, 17. You know, we tried and we tried and we tried and we tried. And you know what? We didn't try. See, the law doesn't require us to try. The law doesn't do anything that mandates an effort. And I tell you something, when there is a law, people follow the law. But when there is no law, you got to follow the law. All right? So the law is independent living, skills development. 1999, Chafee bill doubled the independent living money. And when we had an opportunity to testify to Congress to say, you know, senators, 0 times 2 is still 0. You're doubling something that is totally ineffective, and now you're going to do twice as much of that. And I said, if you're going to do that, if you're going to increase the money, okay, but tie it into concurrent planning at the exit end of the system. As you're preparing kids in their skills, make sure a condition of getting the money is an effort to look for a family at the same time. We could do two things at the same time. Recruit lifetime parents while we educate kids on their skills development. And again, staffers for the senators love the idea. Lots of the politicians love the idea. It was just the same establishment years earlier who changed the goal of APLA to APLA, SAPLA, WMI, AREP. They were against writing it into the law because they knew if you write it into the law, people would actually do that. Now, I had said to the senators, twice as much of nothing is still nothing, and I actually turned out to be incorrect about that. In 1999, there were 560,000 kids in care when the that's around the time of the Chafee bill. 18,968 kids that year got discharged from foster care. A whole city of kids across the country got discharged from foster care when there were 567,000 kids in our care. Fast forward, 2009, drastically dropped the census of the foster care population. 143,000 fewer kids in 2009 than in 1999. And here's how many kids got discharged to emancipation in 2009. 29,471. So not only did it not do nothing, it did worse than nothing. And that's our practice day to day, and we still need to revisit, but until we revisit, we have to be focused on the individual, you and the kids that you know. How can you be instrumental in getting that kid a lifetime family? Because no law is going to make you do it. So how can you do it on your own? And that's the way we find lots of homes for a lot of kids. And the first best way to find a home for any kid is this phrase I'm about to share with you right now. And I'm going to spell out 3 words. And I want you to take out a pen and paper and write these words out so you can visually see it. After I spell out the 9-letter third word, I'm going to count to 3, and I want you to read these 3 words back to me. And the first word is simply okay? You all got that? Just write Oh, excuse me. I guess you all, how do you pronounce that? A? How close? We're not even that close to Canada. We pronounce it A here. In my neighborhood, it's but okay, we'll go with A. Okay, A. Second word, F-A-M-I-L-Y. So now we got these 2 words. Now, I know you think you can do this in your head, but the 9-letter third word is hard to do in your head, so I want you to visualize. I want you to spell it out. 9-letter third word is I-S-N-O-W-H-E-R-E. Now, on the count of 3, read these 3 words back to me. 1, 2, 3. That's it? Family is, now if I played the tape back to you, I would hear family is nowhere. Now you can see something different. Family's now here. Not only see something different, see something entirely opposite. And that's another metaphor I use about any kid that you know right now. We can all look at the same kid and see something entirely different, and it's really our choice. We can see a family is nowhere, and a family will be nowhere. We can see a family is now here, and a family will materialize, and I'll show you how relatively simple it is for making that happen. Unless, of course, you're what do you call it? Right-brained, left-handed thinking person like I was when they did this exercise to me. I screamed out, "A family I snow here." I'm still trying to figure out what that means. But nowhere or now here, that is the question. That is the question. Now, I often have, every now and then, not often, every now and then, a social worker will come up and challenge me and say, "Pat, you think there's a home for every kid, lifetime parent for every kid, but you haven't met Johnny." And I said, "Don't worry, I don't need to meet Johnny. There's a home for Johnny." And they go, "But Johnny's been in this list, resident treatment centers, hospitalized, in diagnostic centers, multiple foster homes. I said, don't worry, we're going to find a home for Johnny. And then he proceeded to tell me every horrible thing Johnny's ever did in his whole life. And I said, don't worry, we'll find a home for Johnny. Then he started saying something else, and I said, you know what? You convinced me. You're absolutely right. Johnny's never getting a family. I agree totally, completely. Now that I agree totally and completely, now I need to tell you why I agree. And why I agree is much related to one of my favorite quotes of all time. Businessman made the quote, but it works just as much in our field. And that quote is, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. But one thing for sure is you'll always be right. So if you think you can do something, I'll show you how relatively simple it is to do it. If you think you can't do something, I can talk till I'm blue in my face. It ain't going to make any difference. But one thing for sure is you will always be right. So when we look for a family is now here. Actually, they are. But if you really hard and fast believe a family is nowhere, then it doesn't matter. If you go looking, you're going to look for something you know is not there, so why bother? And one thing for sure is you will always be right, but what I want people to do is be right in the positive rather than the negative, because you will be right one way or the other. Now, I used to talk to folks about every kid can have a family. But I no longer actually believe there is a family for every child, but I have a slightly different reason than the social workers. I no longer believe there is a family for every child because in a city where I come from, city, tri-state area, we've got about 12 million people in and around New York City, and you certainly have millions of people around here in Atlanta. I come from a state with about 19 million people in it, and you got millions more people in the state of Georgia. We all come from a country with about 300 million people in it. And then right now, whether we like it or not, it's a dirty little secret that people don't hear about, but we actually have kids being adopted from the United States foster care system by people in Canada, by people in Europe. We're a global world now, but we got about 4 billion people on the planet Earth. And the only reason why I no longer believe that there is a family for every child, because with that many people in the world, there is not a family for every child, but an infinite number of families for every child. And all we have to do is stop at the first best family. And the first best family understands this is a lifetime commitment. It's not temporary. Once we have that, that's basically the major job that we need to accomplish before that young person ages out of our care. So there's not a family for every child, but an infinite number of families. Once you know that, once you believe this, once you internalize this, 75% of the job of getting that kid a home is done. Now for the somewhat easier part is identifying the family. Not questioning whether we should do it, understanding we have to do it. Now how? How do we find the family? And even though it's relatively simple, finding a family requires a miracle. And thank goodness I come with a ready definition of what a miracle is. And a miracle is a shift in perception, is a shift in how we perceive a situation. Now, if we wake up this morning and we say the kids are going to be discharged, we're going to do independent living, we're going to let them loose upon the land to wander, not that we intentionally want to do that, but we don't think we can do anything else, then that's what's going to happen. But if you shift your perception a little bit and realize you can't let that happen, and you could be instrumental in preventing that from happening, then miracles will happen. Things will change, simply because we changed our mind. Last statistic of the day, and this is directly related to how we find families. State of Washington, over and out at 18. They did a survey in the state of Washington. 302 17-and-a-half-year-olds about to be discharged from the foster care system. And they asked these young people lots and lots of questions. One of the many questions that they asked them was, how many of you have a close, positive relationship with at least one adult? Now, I would have assumed, most other people assumed, that was going to be a low percentage. And 97% of the kids in the state of Washington preparing to emancipate from long-term foster care in Washington had reported having a close, positive relationship with at least one adult. Now, they didn't ask about 3 adults. They didn't ask them about 5. But they might have seen numbers really close. But almost every one of our kids who are in our care have people that are close to them. people that they feel close to. And it's a positive relationship. It's not necessarily a negative one. When we ask the question, where are the families? Well, you know, there's considerable support for the notion that most of us, and that's in society in general, people in this room, we have attachment problems to some degree, but we know that an individual who truly has no attachments, they don't survive. And the bottom line is kids don't die at way too young an age until after they age out of foster care. While they're here, they're all alive. While they're alive, it's because they have attachments. And what we have to do is we got to first look at who cares about them and talk to those folks about how important it is to make a lifetime commitment. And when we do that, we see incredible, incredible results. I'm going to first plant some of the ideas, and then I'm going to show you some of the evidence-based practice that we had through a different federal grant that I had shared with you. We call it life cycle recruitment. Every kid has got numerous people in their lives who care about them that can be brought forward, including biological relatives, but including just about anybody, any constructive adult, that we can reach out to, share some information, and then see. And the first question we have to ask anybody who knows any kid is, can you adopt the kid? Because the answer is, you got to answer it to yourself. Obviously, if the answer is yes, don't get the kid all excited about it. Get yourself in a position of getting licensed, be able to present yourself as a resource to that kid's treatment team or case managers, and move forward. But let's assume the answer is no. Is the answer no because, well, you wouldn't want this particular kid to live within 50 square miles of wherever it is that you live? That's okay. Nothing bad about that. Just don't rule out the other 4 billion people on planet Earth because we only need one of them. But how about the reverse? How about if the answer is, oh, I'd love to adopt this kid, but my life circumstances just won't allow it? Well, I can guarantee to you, if you feel that strongly about that kid, there's somebody else who does as well, and all you got to do is find that person. One way or the other, every kid has got multiple people who could be brought into what I've come to call a learning process to see if they can make a lifetime commitment to the kids. And no matter what, from this day forward, if you know a kid in this category, we need you to lead the effort to help find that kid a home. And if you can't, for whatever reason, lead the effort, we need you to follow the effort to get that kid a home. And at the very least, if you can't follow the effort to get that kid a home, we need you to get out of the way the effort to get that kid a home. We need you to lead, follow, or get out of the way. But one way or the other, don't discourage it or prevent it from happening. Because then we're in it, and then we're actively conspiring to create homelessness, and now we're just doing it by accident. So, and I'm just going to focus on kids who are living in treatment centers or congregate care, which means group homes, hospitals, treatment centers. We've placed lots of kids with social workers at these institutions. We've placed kids with child care staff at these institutions. Some of the most logical people in a kid's life are the ones that are interacting with them day in and day out. I took a 4-day-a-week consulting job at one of the foster care agencies before I went full-time at You Gotta Believe. And they brought me on to find permanent homes for kids in their 5 group homes and 2 residence treatment centers. And I told them, I go, I'm going to find people who probably work with the kids that want to do this. And would you let me set up an alternative preparation process for people who want to make commitments to teenagers? And they were progressive enough to let me do that. And after a while, so many child care staff wanted to take this class that we had set up that it got to the attention of the executives, and they asked me to meet with them about it. And I went in and I talked to them about it, and I thought I knew what they were gonna say, but they started out with saying, you know, I hear your entire class that you set up is filled with child care staff. And I said, well, there's a lot of child care staff in that class, but it's not the entire class. It's about a third of the class. And he goes, oh, it's only a third of the class. And I go, yeah, it's only a third. He goes, okay, well, you know what? I don't need to meet with you then. I had heard it was the whole class. I said, well, okay. But if it was the whole class, why would you have a problem with that? And then I just thought we were going to start a discussion on something, and he talked in marketing terms. He says, no, if you're just saturate, if you're only looking for child care staff, you're gonna saturate that market fast enough. And I wanted to know that you were looking in other places, not just childcare staff. And I said, yep, absolutely, we're looking in other places. 2/3 of the class are people that are not on your staff. Everything was fine. And then as I'm leaving, I said to him, but you never would have actually had a problem if it was just childcare staff. And he goes, well, why not? Well, with the rate of staff turnover here, you never would have actually made a repeat placement. And he laughed, and I let him get the hell out of here, But it was just interesting that it became a cause of concern when we showed the residences how relatively simple it was to identify people for their kids. We've placed with administrative staff, secretaries on up to associate executive directors. We've placed with school staff, other school personnel. Lots of our kids are in special ed, especially when they're in congregate care. And that's usually a negative connotation, but in the area of having constructive adults walking in and out of a kid's life, you don't just have the teachers now, you have the aides to the teachers. You don't just have the aides to the teachers, you got occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists, social workers, psychiatrists, vision therapists, art therapists, folks walking in and out of our kids' lives that never would have had any thinking about this unless somebody approached them. And one time, one of the things that we do in New York, anytime we have the opportunity, is we want to speak to people like anybody who has any contact with any teenager, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes a year. Now, it's probably a lot different here in Georgia, but in New York, the people who have 5 or 10 minutes a year with their clients are the law guardians and legal aid and lawyers for children and people who have a heavy court caseload. And we have an opportunity to speak to CASA workers and court staff about, well, make it a constructive 10 minutes. Talk to your clients about the people that they know and they care about. So I get a call one day, because lawyers are really good in training and following through with ideas. I get a call from a lawyer one day saying, look, this child's got nobody in this country. Will you accept a referral and help us find a family for the child? I said, absolutely. If you want to make a referral, make a referral. But why do you think you can't find anybody? What do you mean this country? And he had told me about a kid who came up from the Dominican Republic, brought up here by her father, abandoned by her mother down there. Her father proceeded to abuse her so severely, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison just for the abuse of her. Now she's in a diagnostic center and she's got nobody. I said, well, how long has she been in the country? And she said, well, probably about a year. And I go, you know what? She's got somebody. Talk to her again. When he started talking to her again, he had asked again the wrong question. He had asked, do you want to be adopted? Do you have anybody who can adopt you or take you in? And she goes, no, I don't have anybody. And I said, no, that's not what you ask. You ask, who has treated you with some compassion since you've been here? Who has treated you kindly? What you want is to want to know who cares about this kid and who this kid perceives cares about them. And when that lawyer did that, he had found out that she really had a close attachment to her therapist. So the lawyer had asked her, do you have your therapist number? And she goes, no, my therapist left the job over my court case. He goes, you don't happen to have a home phone number, do you? And she goes, no. And what had happened next is what happens all the time when serendipity plays a role in when we expand our minds to say, we can't just let this kid be discharged. We got to see what can happen. What can we make happen in 5 minutes or 5 months or 5 weeks? Well, what can we make happen? Now, in that moment, he's talking to his client, and she gets an incoming call on her cell phone. Now, the client speaks broken English and fluent Spanish. The lawyer speaks fluent English and broken Spanish. So the lawyer can hear the kids talking a mile a minute in Spanish that she's getting together with another kid that night. After she finishes talking to that kid, she excuses herself for another second, presses 2 digits on her phone, dials a 10-digit number, starts talking to a lawyer assumes another kid, and these 3 kids are getting together. But one of the things that the lawyer noticed is, 1, she had a cell phone, and 2, she had numbers programmed in her cell phone. So she said, well, why don't you tell me about the people you program into your cell phone? And the first kid was the kid in the group home with her. Second kid was a kid that went to her school. Even though it was a school on a residential treatment center, this kid was brought in from the community. And this kid lived in the community, and the lawyer's client has been to that kid's house, and there's a potential right there, another kid's parent. That we make placements like that all the time. And then as the lawyer's looking down the list, he notices the name of the kid's therapist, because he knew her. And he said, I thought you told me you didn't have your therapist's phone number. She goes, no, you asked me if I had a home phone number. This is her cell phone number, all right? And they wind up calling the cell phone. Lawyer outreach to the therapist, really thinking the therapist might lead him to somebody. But when he had heard that she was so excited about somebody making contact with her over this kid, he had asked her, well, do you want to take the You Gotta Believe class and try to figure out if this is something that you want to do? And she came down, and she was so excited, and she really, really cared about this kid. And she became the kid's mom. And one of the things I can't do in such a short presentation is tell you the whole story, but one thing I can do is lead you to our website. That'll lead you to our radio. We do a live weekly radio broadcast every Sunday, and the shows get archived for 2 years. And Easter Sunday of 2009, we shared that person's story. And you can hear the whole thing if you want to scroll back to April of 2009. But it was just a remarkable way that people find homes for kids, even if they don't spend a lot of time with them. And we had a judge that ordered something very basic after hearing one of our presentations. Because we don't just find people who aren't related to kids, we find all sorts of folks, including relatives. And it struck me one day when I was, again, at this agency. They made me the director of permanency and placement, which means I was in charge of the home finding department. I'm sitting there. I get to work 15 minutes late. And we had an agreement among the home finding staff that teenagers get top priority in terms of who gets assigned to do home studies. I get to work 15 minutes late. My staff of 8 or 9 people decided they were not going to do a home study of a 24-year-old single woman with no children. And this 24-year-old who had a job and was very mature for her age wanted the 16-year-old in one of the residence treatment centers. She would also take the 16-year-old's 15-year-old sister. The 16-year-old had a baby in a foster home, and the 16-year-old was pregnant. This woman would have taken 2 teenagers and ultimately 2 babies, and my staff had decided they weren't even going to do the home study. And when I asked them why, what do you think they told me? Too young, too inexperienced, too this, too that. They took the kids out of permanency, right? So I said, suppose she was their sister. And they said, well, she's not their sister. And I said, well, that's why I said, suppose she was their sister. And then somebody else had the nerve to say to me, she's not their sister. Then I just said to that person, I go, how do you know she's not their sister? And then she told me the information they had that I didn't, that the birth mother was 30 years old and this kid was 16, you do the math and all right. That's why we get back to suppose she was their sister. Suppose she was their sister. Would you have done the home study? And they basically begrudgingly agreed that they probably would have done it had she been their sister. And I go, well, good. The reason why she came forward for that specific kid was because she is that kid's sister. And it came to about 4 or 5 guesses before they could figure out how that was even possible. Anybody want to guess? Well, no, not different fathers. They had the same father. And, you know, we go through life in foster care as if every child is the product of some sort of immaculate conception. But that's not true. Every child has a paternal side. In fact, we go through foster care as if every child is not the product of any conception at all. And the bottom line is there are many, many relatives, and I wish I had time to show you a piece that I wanted to show you about how you can bring those relatives in, but almost always the kids know who they are, and we outreach to them. Anybody read the book or see the movie Antoine Fisher, Finding Fish? I mean, that's a classic example. Kid came into care at birth, aged out at 21, and things didn't work out very well on the mom's side of the family, so he decided in his mid-30s just to pick up the Cleveland phone book where he was from and call all the Fishers in the book because he knew if the Fishers whose father had died before he was born, that was his father's name. He found so many relatives that in the movie, they had a scene, a welcoming home scene in the movie. And when he was in Brooklyn and we interviewed him for our cable access show, he actually shared with me that half the extras in that scene in the movie was real life relatives. He didn't have to be in foster care 21 days, never mind 21 years. And almost every single kid has got a story of somebody who can come forward. Now, why is it so important to use this strategy? That's the great thing about discretionary grants and federal grants. you have the rare opportunity when you're practicing to collect information because you must hire somebody to do it. And we hired folks at Cornell University to do it. I don't know if anybody's seen an article in Time magazine on January 10th called Extreme Recruitment. But in that article, they cite a study from Cornell University, and this is the study that they cited. And we looked at our numbers during the 4-year period of the grant. 1,143 people walked through our door. This is not just a phone inquiry now. They actually showed up for an orientation. 449 of them completed the training. And our program's about giving everybody the opportunity to think, whether they know the kid or not, about what that kid's greatest need is and to have a lifetime parent. We had 190 completely licensed families, 17% of the people who walked through our door. And during that 4-year period, 120 kids got placed, average age 16. 10% of the people who walked through our door. 63% of the licensed families got a kid during that 4-year period. Maybe a lot of them got after the 4-year period, but during that 4-year period is all we were looking at. Now, we broke the folks that walked through our door into 2 separate categories. 1, people who didn't know a kid, and 2, which is what the grant was all about, people who did know a kid, the recruitment strategy. Now, we were good at educating the public. Because 987 people from the general public just walked through our doors, almost 1,000 during a 4-year period. And they know our public relations is adopt a teen. 33% of them finished the whole 10 weeks of training. 11% of them actually got licensed. 37 teenagers got placed with those 1,000 people, or 4%. And during that 4-year period, only 35% of those folks got a placement. Now, people who did know the teen, only 154 people, only 14% of the folks that walked through our door knew a teenager. 125 of them, 81%, finished the whole 10 weeks of the class. Now, this really dispels a major myth that if you bring somebody in who knows your kid, oh, they're not going to want to take 10 weeks of learning or training. Yeah, they actually want to, because they need to think about what we're asking them to do. And what we're asking them to do is not to do anything temporary, but to make a lifetime commitment of adoption. Whether you do it morally or legally, it's an adoption commitment. 81% of them took the whole learning experience. 84 or 54% of them got fully approved license by New York State. Another myth went down the tubes. Oh, everybody knows our kids are monsters. They're all criminals. They're all this, and their family members, all that. No, they were licensable by New York State standards, the same as the 106. But we only needed 84 of them out of the 154 people who walked through our door, whereas to get the 106, we needed 987 people who walked through our door. 83 kids got placed during that time period, which means 99% placement rate with somebody who came forward for a kid and got licensed. And that just showed us if we get 2 people who know any kid to walk through our door, one of them is actually going to follow through, fully approved and licensed, to make a permanent commitment. And that's where we had learned that there is no better way to recruit lifetime parents for teenagers. Now, we always knew this intuitively, but our documented research is this is a slam dunk. The best way is to bring in somebody that knows our kids and teach them how important it is to make a lifetime commitment to them. Now, the last thing I just wanted to go over with you before we open up for questions is to just sort of, there's a lot of talk going around the country today, and you will hear that probably in future presentations by other folks, about teen permanency, that I contend to you right now has absolutely positively nothing to do with permanency. We have a lot of things that are being sold as permanency that have nothing to do with getting kids a permanent parent. So what I always like to do is I like to start out by just sharing with you what happens when we take the parent out of permanent, all right? And you see we got the word permanent here? And it's a 9-letter word, permanent. I'm going to take the parent out of this word permanent. I'm going to take the P out. We'll take the A out. We'll take the R out. We'll take the E out. We'll take the N out, take the T out. When we take the parent out of permanent, we're left with M&E. And M&E is not bad, it's just mostly not enough. Every single kid, before they get discharged from our care, they need a lifetime parent recruited for them, and anybody can change their mind at any moment to be the person that's going to look and get them thinking about who's in their life. And that's permanent. Parents are permanent. Now, what else is being sold as permanency? We got a lot of things being sold as permanency. For instance, we hear about mentors in lieu of a permanent family. We got to get our kids mentors. And you know, the bottom line is, mentors are good people. Mentors are a part of the village that can raise the child. But picture a kid who just got discharged from foster care to nobody but himself, walks out the foster care door on day one and steps into a pile of quicksand. Now, as they're sinking rather slowly, the mentor pal comes up to him and says, "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" Now, Johnny is overwhelmed with the fact that even though he learned how to do his laundry, he doesn't have any money to wash his clothes, doesn't have any place to wash his clothes. The fact that he learned how to pay his bills, but he doesn't have any money to pay the bills. He learned how to pay the rent, but there's no place to live. So he's overwhelmed, sinking. So he looks up to his mentor and says, "Oh, I'm fine, everything is fine." And another word for permanency that we've heard, even in New York, I kidded them with that, significant connection. Now, connections are very important to kids because the connections very often, by and large, are their birth people. Can't raise them, can't prevent them from becoming homeless. They're a significant part of the kid's life, but they're not permanent. They're not permanency. They're not a parent. As the kid is sinking, the connection says, "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" "Fine, just fine." Volunteers, or in New York, what we've come to call them is paid volunteers. The oxymoron of all time. We actually have a program that pays volunteers to hang in with kids, even though they don't establish where the kid's going to be hanging. Got resources, permanency resources. That's a lot of nice words. Permanency resource. What does that mean? I don't know. But that's what we call it. Now, here's the point. As the kid is sinking further and further down, and the village is coming, well, they're still sinking unless there's a parent that comes up from the bottom and they stop the sinking. See, once you stop the sinking, these folks are very significant in that family's life. You know, we're placed with a lot of single parents. You don't think our single parents really appreciate mentors and connections and volunteers and resources? Of course they do. But without that parent, that kid is sinking. Now, I don't know about you, but the village raised me when I was a child. Yeah, I couldn't cause all sorts of trouble when I was out there, cursing in the street or getting in trouble, because Mrs. Hauser would come down and tell me to stop. You know what I would do? I would stop. Why did I stop? Because if I didn't stop, Mrs. Hauser walks down the block and rings my mother's doorbell and tells my mother. As long as I stopped, she wasn't going to do that. That's how the village raises the child, but there's got to be a parent in the village to be able to raise the child. What we're trying to do is create no foundation. Just let them loose. And that doesn't work. That's why kids need parents. But when we take the parent out of permanent, we're left with mostly not enough versus the foundation of family that springboards every child's future, including just about everybody in this room. When we take the parent out of permanent, we're left with commitment light, which is not bad. Mentors are good people. Volunteers are good people. Connections, resources, good people. But only parents offer themselves unconditionally for a lifetime. And that's how they ought to be recruited for a kid that's going to be discharged to nobody. When you take the parent out of permanent, you're left with round holes rather than square pegs. Now, round holes aren't bad. They just don't fit the square peg. When we take the parent out of permanent, we're left in lieu of family or family-like programs rather than real families. Family-like, in lieu of families, they're okay while the kid's in care, but there's going to be a birthday where that's over. Now, I know some of you are going to be surprised to hear this, but sometimes people come up to me and they say, Pat O'Brien, you think you have all the answers, don't you? And I said, well, getting a kid's family, that's not easy. I mean, when the kid moves in, it's not easy. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of connections. So it's not easy. So it's not like it's all the answers. But I can tell you one thing for sure. It may not be all the answers, but I can swear to you that it is the only answer. Because in this scenario, second best is just not enough. It's sort of like deciding that we're going to treat infection in society. We'll do everything to tackle infection except antibiotics. We don't do antibiotics. Or we'll treat diabetes with everything under the sun except, no, we're not going to use insulin. We're not. That's child welfare practice with older kids. We're going to get that kid permanency except we don't get them parents. How insane is that? It's insane. But because there's no teeth in the law, we can go on about our business doing that. Except on a one-to-one. You can change your mind today, and that can make a difference. And that will make a difference. Last thing I just want to share with you is my friend. I have an African-American professor in Massachusetts who taught me about an issue about a dozen years ago that I had not given much thought about until she educated me on the issue. And the issue was racial reparations. She fully, strongly believed that African Americans in the United States are entitled to a monetary settlement from the United States government because of the things their ancestors suffered during slavery. And she had good rationale. She talked about the fact that our industrialized nation was able to spin off the way it was because we were able to build a railroad system on the backs of free labor. And I sort of understood where she was coming from, but I didn't fully understand the issue. And I travel a lot, and one day I'm in an airport, and I see this article in Harper's Magazine. And the article, the title was "The Case for Racial Reparation." So I picked up the article, I started reading it, and I was fascinated by a quote in the article by one of the lawyers who did not believe reparations would ever be paid because of slavery. And in his legal opinion, the reason why that would never happen is because slavery was legal. But he still believed in racial reparation, but not because of slavery. He believed in racial reparation because of the emancipation. And this is what he had to say about that subject. He said, think about this. In 1865, the federal government of this country freed 4 million blacks without a dime, with no property, nearly all illiterate. They were let loose upon the land to wander. That's what began the aftermath of slavery, and in this lawyer's opinion, the cause of action for racial reparations. And the reason why that quote struck me as so eerie, here it is, 145 years later, and we do the exact same thing to tens of thousands of young adults or teen children, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native, in our care every year. We discharge them without a dime in their pockets. Some places used to give $500. That didn't even cover first month's rent. Without any property for sure. Rarely with a high school diploma, so they might as well be illiterate even if they can read if they don't have a high school diploma. And without that unconditionally committed permanent parent in their corner, they are simply being let loose upon our land to wander. And we could do absolutely better for each and every kid in our care. Being a social worker, and maybe you guys, any of your social workers, often we get presents that nobody else gets. And I kept getting this saying, this poem. People would give it to me. Like one time I got this poem on a postcard. I read the saying, not impressed with it, didn't get it. I threw the postcard out. Then in a future time, I get a card with the saying on the front of the card. And there was some writing on the inside of the card. So I kept the card because of the writing on the inside, but I was not impressed with the same saying on the outside. Then one day, somebody gives me a cheap plaque with the saying on it. Same exact saying. I respectfully accepted the plaque, and then when the time was ripe, I filed the plaque under G for garbage. I was not impressed. Then one day in the future, I get an award, a really nice award, from people that I respect. And my name's engraved, and it's really, really nice. And then on top of the award is that saying. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they must have like they must have 1,000 of these at the trophy store. And so I, but I decided this time I was going to talk to my friend about the saying. First of all, I wanted to know if, like they had 1 million of these at the store. And he goes, you know what? We picked this one out for you. And when he heard my story, he said, probably all those other people did as well. And I said, I just don't get it. Now, let me tell you what the saying is. Saying is this. You ever hear this one, 100 years from now? 100 years from now will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove. But the world may be different because it's important in the life of a child. The reason why that never made any impression on me is because 100 years from now, every kid that I help, they're as dead as me. Why do I got to be reminded of that, right? And he sat down and said, out of all the people that don't get this, I can't believe you don't get this. Because it's not just about preventing homelessness. Parents are far more important than just preventing homelessness. 95% of our kids are going to have children. You're going to raise a child, you don't want anybody raising a child that has never had any modeling of what parenting is. And I was thinking about all the parents that I placed kids with over the years who didn't get any satisfaction out of raising their kids while their kids were teenagers. And they didn't really understand the impact of what they did until their kids started having children. Then they watched how those children were raised. And that's when they saw their parenting. That's when they really understood that they made a difference. And that goes on for generations to come, way longer than 100 years from now. And then I became more impressed with an individual word in that last sentence. But the world may be difficult because it's important in the life of, I'll use your language, a child, just one. And the privilege each and every one of us in this room has. Because we are child welfare professionals. We got 80 people in this room, and we can, over the course of our careers, commit to changing 10 kids' lives. That's 800 kids whose lives would be turned around in a different direction because we had an awareness of what their needs were, what their greatest need is. We can do that. That's doable over 10 years. 10 kids over the course of our entire career. We have a lot more power and authority and information and contact than the general population. We can all commit to that. The world will be a better place for generations to come. And the last thing, I just wanted to rewind just a little bit about, you remember I told you about the cell phone and how we find families for kids, and we do a lot of innovative stuff. Let me tell you something. After I place some kids now, they get to know me a little bit, and often they ask me to be their Facebook friend. And then I am so amazed that they got more friends than I do. Maybe twice as many friends as I do. And I know maybe 90% of them is nothing. But if we just look at who they're talking to on Facebook, we'll be led to people. There's just an unending pool of people that are involved in our kids' lives we pay no attention to because we have this way of practicing. But we can make a difference. And until our laws can change, the only way change will come is one person at a time. You having a new awareness that will get you thinking about your kids differently. And that, my friends, will be a miracle. Now, we have the room for 15 more minutes, and I'd like to know what's on your mind. I'd like to answer any questions you might have. And we do have microphones, so the folks in the back who are taping this can hear this. Mr. Church, are you asking a question? Okay. Okay, well, how about this? How about if nobody asks a question, then every one of you who raised your hand that you knew a kid who would be homeless by my definition, you're going to get that kid lined up in the next 6 months. And if you don't think so, ask a question. Okay, yeah.
I'll ask a question. Do you use a specific curriculum when you train the parents?
Good question. The curriculum is not, the actual curriculum is not as important as the philosophy behind all curriculums. The philosophy behind all curriculums is permanency, and we just have to constantly bring that home. So we have to deliver a canned curriculum in New York. It's called GPS2 MAP. Folks here in Georgia have to deliver, I think, Impact. Is that what it is? Some places have to deliver Pride. It doesn't matter. Just as long as we're focused on there are lots of kids who don't need anything temporary. So we have to bring the curriculum back to permanency. And our own curriculum, we're not recruiting anybody short term. So we can really be purist in the commitment aspect that the kid that moves in with you never moves out. And then we use the GPS2 MAP curriculum to deliver that. Now we bring kids in, we bring families in, we do a lot of innovative things with the curriculum that's with a real specialty in teen permanency, because that is what we do. But if you don't have that, you still have a curriculum that's being delivered. And what you want to do is call the trainer and say, you got somebody very special taking that class. They're not here to do temporary. They're here to make a lifetime commitment to this kid. Don't forget that that's part of your curriculum. Because most of the time they do forget. Yes? Can you give her the microphone? Oh. No, the gentleman in the back needs to hear.
You're based in New York, and I'm wondering if you do consultation with agencies that are interested in having this as their focus.
Yes, I mean, and I'm going to be very honest with you about that. We try to do innovative things with our programs. And one of the ways we can raise non-designated money is by me going around the country and flapping my lip and consulting with folks. So we would actually appreciate it. And the money goes to the organization for our programs. It doesn't come to me. I have a decent enough salary. I don't need the money. But yes, we do that. Questions about? Okay.
In your experience with disruption of the placements?
You know, the interesting thing about disruption, I mean, most placements work. I would say a good 80% of them the first time works. But the interesting thing about the work that we do is you stick with a kid with a permanency mindset and you do not accept a short-term temporary placement ever for them. At some point, if the first placement don't work, the second one will. The second one don't work, the third one will. And almost always, if there's ever even a third placement, we have permanency for everybody that we try to place. So the fact is, if a kid had 3 placements, it would be 3 placements where the intention was permanent, as opposed to 19 placements and none of them there was any intention on permanency. And the reason why people give up, and we teach them that before they get a kid, is nothing to do with the kid. There's no such thing as a kid who's responsible for a disruption. In fact, there's only one category where a kid is actually responsible for a disruption, and that would be the picture of the couch, the family couch here. Kid sitting in the couch. Kid says, I'm fed up with this family. Family, get out of my house. When the family leaves the house, that kid was responsible for the disruption. But short of that, these are folks that are put in touch with some pain that they could deal with, and they choose not to. And we continue to look for permanent homes if somebody does that. But we have much greater success with people who know the kids, as opposed to people from the general public. People, and you know, I walk a fine line in my own agency because some of the best workers and the best families I have worked for me, and they came from the general public. And we're teaching them strategies about how to bring in people who already know the kid. And they sort of understand, because of day-to-day practice, that it's still a more wise way to go, but it's not exclusive. It's just that there's so much more work to do when we bring in people from the general public. Like 1,000 people gets 37 kids placed, whereas 154 people got 87 kids placed. So that's where we're gearing our practice, and we're bringing in lots more folks to help us now. Because in this day and age, you know, economy is the economy. But we got lots of people who want to mentor and volunteer, and we're going to teach our mentors and volunteers how to find kids' families using these techniques. And anybody can do it. Thanks for that question. Yes?
You just briefly touched on my question, but I guess the bigger question that I have is, how do you overcome the adults in a child's life blaming most of the things on the child's behavior, not just a disruption?
Well, I mean, again, I see that in practice of traditional foster care, where everything is the child, everything's the child. They came to do temporary, they got the child because the agency asked them for a favor, you know? So the way we sort of overcome that is by trying to find somebody who is predisposed in favor of the kid to begin with, you know? And then when there are issues, they're more likely to work them out, more likely to listen to good parenting advice. They're more likely to do a lot of things if they're already committed. But you know, people, and the training that we give families teaches anybody that that's your issue. When your solution is abandon, reject, and hurt a child, that's not the kid's issue any longer. That's your issue, which you will grow from if you keep your commitment. And some of our strongest parents are the ones that tried to give up or thought they had to give up and hung in there with their kids because they grew as human beings. But lots of people give up in this commitment-phobic society, and all we got to do is keep on moving forward until we find somebody. But it's and what we want to do is we want to support the families that we make. And that's why I've taken to really believing that the kids' other connections and volunteers and resources can really help stabilize the parenting relationship. And we got a lot of good placements where the kids come with people. They just don't have people that were going to prevent them from becoming homeless. And then, you know, the general things, when placements are stable, then you encourage people for community resources. You know, if you need family therapy, get family therapy. You need individual therapy, get individual therapy. But the foundation of any treatment is the fact that there's a family. Yes?
My question is, how then do you, at what point maybe do you bring the child in so that he becomes or she becomes a primary part of the process? I mean, they have a jaded, sort of cynical expectation about permanency, and even though you're doing really great work in terms of building relationships with people that they know, their expectation about what that means really makes a difference. And so how do you deal with that?
Well, we don't expect that any kid will ever believe anybody's permanent with their life experience. So all we need for them to do is lead us to somebody they care about, and then we work on those grown-ups. Because while they're in care, you keep the body somewhere. So if you're going to keep the body in a group home, or you're going to keep the body in a temporary home, why not keep the body in a home that's committed to them? Despite the fact that they don't believe anybody's keeping them. And that's where I mentioned a little bit earlier. That's when a lot of our kids actually agree to be adopted. When they're long out of foster care, and then they start coming up with reasons like, well, I have a child now. Something happens to me, they're going to call the wrong people. I want to be adopted, so they call the right people. You know, as they get older and their brains develop, and we find somebody who absolutely does not give up on them and treats them as a parent, they come around to it. But in the meantime, what we do instead is use their opinion, and I understand why kids don't want to be legally adopted. It's sort of like saying to somebody who has had 17 wives, I'll marry you, you know, but they need to see proof in a parenting relationship where it's unilateral. Grown-ups, no matter what parenting relationship, commits to the kid. We hope our kids come around. That's even our birth kids. And that's what every kid needs. And our kids, by the way, intellectually, tend to appreciate their parents more than birth kids do. Because our kids, when we place them at 16, 17, 18, they never had anybody stay committed to them. They have no expectation anybody will. So when somebody does, intellectually and emotionally, they see that, they feel that. You know, and it's really, really amazing. We tell every one of our parents, treat the kid that we place with you as the child that's going to bring you your last glass of water. Because I've been in this field long enough now where we've had parents that have died. And it was the kid that we placed that was actually there at the hospital at the end. The birth parents scattered to California and Nebraska to get as far away from their parents as possible. And our kids tend to move out, but they move down the block, around the corner, they stay closer to home. And they're there. So there's really an amazing connection if you don't force them into anything. We just talk to them. They lead us to people. Sometimes we lead them to people, and they say yes or no. And even if they don't say no to moving in, we've accomplished it. Because if they're moving into one of our families, that family knows that they're committed forever. And that's about as much as we can expect from a teenager who has faced as much abandonment and rejection as our teenagers have. Yes. Who got the microphone? Oh, okay.
Do the parents receive any type of monetary compensation?
Yeah, you know, and interestingly enough, the people who know our kids don't expect anything. So when they hear there's a foster care stipend or an adoption subsidy, for even if it's a short period of time, that's more than they were thinking about, and they really appreciate it, especially the medical benefits. So one way or the other, we utilize the system that exists to support families. So they either get, when I talked about two separate families, adoptive families and OPLA permanency families, well, when we print out the license of the OPLA permanency family, it says foster parent on the license because we only have one license. But the mindset of being prepared is this is a lifetime commitment, and we're going to utilize the foster care system, or now, hopefully soon, well, we just got a subsidized guardianship in New York, but it doesn't include non-relatives. So we still might need to utilize the foster care system for permanency, but our families are signing up forever. And the only reason why they do not adopt is because of the circumstances. It's not because they are choosing not to adopt. So if they adopt, there's subsidy until 21, and if they do foster care, there's a stipend until 21. The question there?
Hi, I'm a big proponent of adoption. I have seen some unfortunate situations where an older teen has been adopted, and because of their life, they've got some issues, and
of course,
oftentimes the parents become afraid of the child.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to talk people into considering adoption, that seems to come up frequently.
Never talk anybody into adoption, just so you know.
Gotcha.
Just want you to know. Now, how we train them and prepare them says, what happens if your birth child does the same thing? What do you do? Do that. Case closed. Case closed. Because you don't think just adopted kids have all these problems. They used to say to me, go on a mental ward. 40% of those residents are adopted. Did you just say 60% of them are not adopted? Well, what do those parents do? Do that. One thing they don't do, they don't say, you're not my child anymore. I'm walking away. You're dead. Only the foster care does anybody do that. And it's not because the foster parents are bad people. That's the practice. It don't work good. Give them back. You're dead now. What would you do with your birth kid with the same fears and the same problems? Do that. They need to be treated somewhere. I already said we place kids who are still living in institutions. They might need to be in drug treatment programs. They might wind up in jail. And this is all during our preparation. We cite those scenarios. And when we don't say it's the kid that we placed, we say, imagine it's your birth child. What do you do? Because whatever you would do in that scenario, that's exactly what you do for this kid. Except, hell of a lot less guilt. Nobody's going to blame you for these problems. They just want you to help get the kid to their future. Birth parents have it a lot harder. Because who gets the blame for everything that kids do? It's them. I mean, you might feel like blaming adoptive parents, but everybody intellectually understands this kid came with a lot of issues that need to be resolved. And the only way it's even going to have a chance of working is if you don't break your commitment. And that doesn't mean parenting kids from homes if they can't be parented from home. But that means not going away as if you're dead. And that's been the practice of so many places. And it's almost us professionals encourage it, rather than have any expectation that, well, we're going to do the same thing you would have done if this was your birth child. And that's not sit around and let the kid abuse you. We're going to take an action. So when people are committed, there's a lot of healing that goes on because they're not going to walk away. And we've assisted people getting their kids into treatment programs, residential treatment programs. But this is uniquely different because a family's going to be involved. So that's what I'd say to that. Thanks for the question. Oh, yes, sir.
Thinking globally, is this problem as rampant in other countries and cultures as it is in ours?
Interesting.
And if so, are there other approaches that have been tried?
I don't think anybody ever created a different approach other than the family. So, I mean, I don't give a crap what research shows us. I don't really care about evidence-based practice. 98% of us didn't grow up in foster care. 75% of us who go into foster care get connected to family. And now we got these remaining few. Now, all I know is Canada and the United States, we don't do a great job of it because there's no bite in the law. We don't have a law that says, mandates us under OPLA, for instance, to get the funding to say you got to do concurrent planning. You got to do two things at the same time. Do what you're going to do and recruit a lifetime parent. And I'm not even suggesting you have to be successful. You just have to make the effort, because I know if you make the effort, things happen. And, of course, change the OPLA law to make it mean a human being and not an institution. Because right now, there's no bite in that law either. All of these residential programs can keep a kid in up until the day they become homeless. And I venture to guess that's probably the same in other countries. Because for some reason I never fully grasp when kids get older, we all have our theories, but when kids get older, they become more and more disposable when they actually need the service of family even more. So, but this is pretty much definitely a 50-state, and I don't know how many provinces they have in Canada, but it's really a North American thing that we plan to discharge kids to nobody. And it's based on a history of what we did 30, 40 years ago, where maybe it was possible for an 18-year-old to get a job and be out on their own. It's not possible anymore. It's not possible for 26-year-olds, your own kids. It's not possible. So what we're doing is just going back to what we already know, and that's to get every kid a family. Uh-huh. Well, no, they shouldn't. Step-down families could be permanent. Well, you see, we're not giving them an alternative. We're not mandating looking for step-downs that are going to be permanent. When we stumbled into this federal grant, that's exactly what we were doing for the residential treatment centers. We were stepping kids down. We had to start using their language. We had to stop saying this is a permanent family. We had to start saying whatever they wanted us to say, but we know that family was recruited as a lifetime that's going to be there after they age out of care. Now, it would be better if we could just put some teeth into the law and say we must recruit step-down families that are going to be permanent. Because right now, it's what exists, and what exists makes no sense. Because that kid will leave that institution, that kid will leave that family if it's not planned to be something other than that. So, and we come up with all sorts of names. One of the things that when I do foster parent training, which is theoretically temporary, I ask people if they would prefer us to write on their license, foster waffler. And they say no. I said, how about foster babysitter? They go, no. How about foster caretaker? He goes, no, we want parents. Okay, well then let me teach you what parents do. And at the end of the day, parents keep their kids. And for kids who need permanent, we shouldn't plop them into temporary homes. We can recruit lifetime families for them, and we can do it in a reasonably quick period of time once we change our orientation to the greatest need. We're going to bring in new people for those kids that are stepping down. We're not going to use the current pool of recruited temporary people from the general public. We're bringing in other people that know and are connected to our kids, and that's what we did in that federal grant. And that's why lots of kids step down into permanent homes. Let me see if I can put that one up again. I like that stat. So we're just doing it wrong, and we can correct our practice when we choose to. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry to have to do this, but I am going to cut off questions in the interest of time. But I thank you for your questions, for your active participation, and I hope that you'll join me one last time in thanking our visiting scholar-in-law, Pat O'Brien.
Visiting scholar-in-law. Like a mother-in-law, I'm a scholar-in-law.
Thank you so much.